As we continue in our response series, one decision that will have to be made during a large-scale disaster or localized incident is whether to stay or go. Many factors go into deciding whether or not to evacuate in instances where orders have not been issued yet. This lesson will help you and your client by giving you both the information you will need to feel confident in whichever decision is made. This lesson will cover the following topics in more detail: shelter in place versus evacuation, warnings and orders, considerations, and deciding to shelter in place or evacuate. Now, you might be wondering why we are talking about situational awareness in a training about evacuating and sheltering in place. The reason for this is that they are directly linked. Good situational awareness is an important factor in evacuations and shelter in place orders for the following reasons. If your client is aware of the details of the disaster they are facing, they can make more informed decisions. They can do this by paying attention to the news, weather reports, and local officials, signing up for emergency alerts, which will provide them with the best information, and there are many phone apps that exist that can increase their awareness. By the end of this training, you will be able to explain the difference between a shelter in place and an evacuation to your client, the difference between an evacuation warning and order, identify the actions to take if a shelter in place or evacuation warning or order is issued, and determining whether sheltering in place or evacuating is the better option. Let's start with what a shelter in place is and some considerations that go into them. FEMA defines them as the use of a structure to temporarily separate individuals from a hazard or threat. Not all incidents and disasters will be appropriate for sheltering in place. Sheltering in place requires significant planning and preparation as it could last days or more, and typically the first choice for officials. As you can see, it's pretty self-explanatory, and we will cover how to prepare to shelter in place later in this presentation. I am sure that all of you know what an evacuation is. However, it is important we define the term to properly frame this training. FEMA defines them as an organized, phased, and supervised withdrawal, dispersal, or removal of civilians from dangerous or potentially dangerous areas and the reception and care in safe areas. It is important that your client understands their evacuation routes and zones before an incident occurs. They may have days to evacuate, or they may have minutes, depending on the disaster they are facing. This is why having a plan already made is crucial. And you can see why a shelter in place order would be the first choice for officials, because evacuations require a lot more moving parts. Now, I am sure all of you have heard the terms evacuation warnings and evacuation orders. Sometimes it can be confusing to distinguish between the two. To help with that, I modified a popular graphic which explains the differences between a weather watch and a warning to apply it to evacuations instead. So an evacuation warning means that there is a potential threat to life or property in the affected area. It is a good idea to assume that an order is coming, so make sure your client knows this. And that's because those that require extra time should treat a warning as an order and get out now, as they might require more time to get ready. So an evacuation warning means we have the ingredients necessary to issue an evacuation order, but we aren't there yet. But it's highly likely we're going to make the tacos. Those needing extra time are those with disabilities, children, livestock, pets, etc. This applies to weather events like floods as well. However, when discussing weather events, having the ingredients for a flood to happen would be referred to as a flood watch, not a flood warning. Now we will talk about the evacuation order. And it's exactly like it sounds. We have reached when it is necessary to order people to evacuate their residences. Using the taco example, the tacos have been made and it's time to eat. So, an evacuation order is a lawful order to leave now due to an immediate threat to life, and the area being evacuated may be closed to public access and enforced by the presence of police or other officials, and it can involve door-to-door notifications, announcements from a helicopter, or loud speaker notifications from emergency vehicles. Going back to weather events like floods, this would be the flood warning. This means flooding has begun or will begin very shortly with near certainty. Again, this is not to confuse you. This is just tying it back to what the original purpose of the graphic was.
That unique sounding siren is known as the high-low siren. The Ventura County Sheriff's Office has implemented this siren to alert residents to the need to evacuate during an emergency. The frequency and intensity of wildfires has increased in California, and every second counts when evacuating. People often tune out regular police sirens, requiring deputies to go door to door to inform residents of an evacuation. This high-low siren allows us to quickly alert entire neighborhoods that they're in immediate danger. If you hear this siren in your community, you need to evacuate immediately. To register for emergency notifications in your area, please visit www.vcalert.org.
So this was a video showcasing one of the ways that officials in Ventura County alert residents of an evacuation order. While this is specific to Ventura County, other areas have similar ways to alert residents from patrol vehicles. So contact your local officials to see if they have a similar type of siren or way to let residents know. Now that we know what sheltering in place in, let's discuss it in more detail. Some situations where sheltering in place is an option are active shooters, chemical hazards, earthquakes, flooding or flash flooding, nuclear incidents, pandemics, thunderstorms, tornadoes, and windstorms. So when we're talking about sheltering in place, there are times where they may be the best option if it's possible to do so. If you find yourself in one of these situations, such as you're outside and there's a tornado, while not the most likely scenario where we live, you would want to get inside wherever that is in the situation. So if you were outside your home, you want to get inside your home. If you're out shopping, you want to get into a store if you weren't already in the store. Then what you want to do is find a safe spot once inside, depending on the situation. So let's say in this case it's flooding, a little bit more likely scenario. You'd want to maybe get to a second floor, the highest place possible, if there's a lot of flooding going on. If you do shelter in place, you're going to want to stay put until you're told it's safe to leave. And then this is where you're going to want to activate, or your client will, their personal communications plan. This is more for when you're sheltering in place at home. You need to prepare to self-sustain. So this is where having those emergency supplies is going to be really key. And then consider sealing the room if needed. So I want to expand on sealing a room. So this is typically a result of a nearby hazardous materials incident involving the release of chemicals into the air. So when considering sealing a room or location, your client will need to know that they need to turn off household items that move air, such as fans or air conditioners. If doing this, instruct your client to get them and anyone else inside the room to be sealed. Bathrooms are a good option for obvious reasons. If they are at home, tell them to bring their emergency supplies with them from where they are in the house to where they're going to be sheltering, assuming they're not contaminated, and make sure they're easy to get to. They will need to find a way to block air from entering the room. So remember back to the video in our Go Kit lesson about building a shelter in place kit, where she was talking about how she would have the plastic sheeting and duct tape. So this is where that comes into play. So then you would instruct them to listen to officials for further instructions using either TV, internet, or their phone. While this sounds like a lot, just remember if they have an emergency plan, they can just refer to it. So they don't have to remember it all. So make sure that you're putting in your emergency plan, perhaps a page on what to do if you need to seal off a room and where the supplies are and how that will be done. You can even predetermine which room it'll be and just have them already in that room, even separate from your kit if you'd like. But honestly, I would just keep them with the kit, because if you have to adjust because something in that room makes it not safe, you're going to want to have that stuff with you. Now let's talk about sheltering in place in the vehicle. Now the assumption for this slide is going to be that your client is somebody who has their driver's license and drives. So depending on the threat when driving, your client may not be able to make it into a structure. So make sure they know that they need to pull over to a safe place and stay put until it's safe to get back on the road, and listen to the radio for updates. So what happens if you're with your client in a vehicle, or they are in theirs alone and they need to shelter in place? Let's say a strong thunderstorm rolls through, bringing hail and high winds, and neither of you feel safe driving. Let's also add to this scenario that both of you received a weather alert since you signed up for emergency alerts, hint, hint. So what do? You're going to want to pull over to the side of the road, You're going to want to stop the vehicle in the safest place possible and turn off the engine. In this instance, if there's an area where there's cover, like a bridge, this would be a place you'd want to pull over to. If it's warm outside, it's better to stop under a bridge or in a shady spot so no one overheats. And stay put until officials say it's safe to get back on the road or the conditions have improved locally. This is where you want to listen to the radio for updates and additional instructions. Modern car radios do not use much battery power, so listening to the radio for an hour or two should not cause the car battery to die. And even after it's safe to get back on the road, just keep listening to the radio and follow the directions of law enforcement officials because things may change. So let's talk about evacuating now. So you're going to want to ensure that your client is signed up to receive emergency alerts and or that they know to listen to the radio or news when there's something going on. Make sure they know to grab their go kit and supplies and follow their emergency plan. Let them know they can gather sentimental and irreplaceable items if it's possible and safe to do so. Obviously, if it's a wildfire, they're right by the hill and the fire is coming down the hill, they might not have time to grab those irreplaceable things. So just make sure you talk that through with them. You're going to want to leave early to beat the rush and reduce the likelihood of being trapped by the threat if possible. As you can see here, this looks like it's PCH. I believe this was actually the Woolsey fire. And so look at all those cars on the road. So if you get the warning that comes out, that's kind of why we said treat it like an order, get out, as soon as possible, and maybe you'll beat some of this traffic. Make sure that they take pets and service animals. Also, if time allows, make sure they know to call or email the out-of-state contact in their family communications plan and tell them where they're going. Secure their home by closing and locking doors and windows. You'd be surprised how often some of the fires, the houses that burn in wildfires, are because somebody left a window open and an ember just happened to blow in, and the house would have survived otherwise. Um, if they have time, tell them to unplug electrical equipment such as radios, televisions, and small appliances. Leave freezers and refrigerators plugged in unless there's a risk of flooding. That way your food can be preserved for as long as possible. And have them shut off the water, gas, and electricity before leaving if they are able to. And then have them leave a note telling others when they left and where they're going. This is going back to that leave a breadcrumb trail. Uh, Tell them to have sturdy shoes and clothing that provide some protection, such as long pants, long sleeve shirts, and a hat. In this situation, with us being in California, we're likely talking about wildfires in this situation. And then have them check with neighbors to see if they can get a ride if needed, if they don't drive themselves, or if they do drive, if they can offer rides to others. Also, you want to make sure that they follow their recommended evacuation route if it's different from their planned route. So sometimes they might have a specific evacuation route set up for people, and they need to know it might be different from what they planned on. So just make sure that they're aware of that. Listen to where the officials are saying to evacuate if you're given a place to go or a route to take. That's going to be important. They're giving you a route for a reason. Make sure they know to be alert and pay attention to the road hazards and use alternate routes if needed. Um, Make sure they head to their pre-identified evacuation location or meeting area. This is from that emergency plan. And initiate the communications plan and let others know they are safe. And make sure they know do not take shortcuts or unfamiliar routes because they might become trapped if something happens. All right, now we've arrived at the purpose of this training. Should your client stay put or should they evacuate? So I know that I said you'd be able to know what to do, or rather which option to choose in this training. However, a common answer to questions in emergency management is applicable here, and that answer to a lot of questions can be it depends. So ultimately, it will depend on the totality of circumstances. Your client will need to take all that they have done to prepare, all they have learned from you from this series so far, and the information they have gathered for the disaster they are facing. Taking all of this, you must empower them to use their best judgment to determine what is best for them. For example, if a fire is at the top of the hill behind their house, sheltering in place is not a good idea and they should evacuate. Conversely, if there was a chemical spill nearby and they would have to drive or walk through the area where the chemical was spilled, they should shelter in place and wait until told it's safe to leave. In closing on this topic, it's best to use extreme examples to illustrate how to apply what has been learned so far. So make sure you include them and have them come up with scenarios. Even the zombie apocalypse can be used, though not likely. Work together with them and talk through their scenarios. Then if it helps them, Write it down and add it to their plan. Just make sure that they know that it's not possible to come up with every possible scenario and they may have to make the choice on their own. That is why it is best to focus on the main concepts and bring it back to basics. Could they be hurt if they stayed? If so, leave. So here's a fun video that goes over some of what we talked about today.
Well, regardless where you live, a visit from disaster is inevitable. And much like a visit from any unwanted house guest, you never know when he's going to show up or how long he's going to stay. And pretending to not be at home might work well for some guests, but disaster? Well, he's a little more wily. So the big question you need to ask yourself before he does show up is, should I stay or should I go? In the case of severe weather, well, we all know to take shelter. But what about a huge chemical spill or radiation exposure? You need to know the details of where and how to shelter in place, and you need to learn about it now, because when disaster is already trying to get in, it's too late. And what about those other mass disasters with the need to evacuate? If disaster's approaching, there won't be time to pull out the map and figure it out. You should have a plan in place. Where to go, how to get there, who to contact, and what to take, and how to secure your home. You should also have an emergency kit ready to grab and go if needed. Remember, some roadways and evacuation routes can be affected by disaster. So make sure you have a plan B and a plan C. And stay informed. Your smartphone can be a good place to start, but without power, cell phone coverage, or internet access, a NOAA All Hazards radio might be the smarter choice. You know, it sounds like a lot, and it is. So take the time now, because when disaster gets here, you might have 30 minutes, or you might have 30 seconds, and he'll be right on top of you before you know it. So the time you take now can save valuable seconds, and potentially your life. Well, we can't keep disaster from coming, but knowing the risks for your area and knowing exactly what to do when he does arrive will help make disaster a house guest we can all survive. Make an emergency kit, have a plan to stay or go, and be prepared to stay informed. For details on sheltering in place and determining when you should stay or go, go to preparemetrokc.org for more information. Because like it or not, he is coming to your house. Don't you have a robe? I didn't expect that.
The resources you see here are linked on the TCRC website and the Rescue Tri-County section, as well as in the video description below. The first is the FEMA Hazard Specific Shelter in Place Guide, which provides guidance on sheltering in place for different scenarios. Next is CalOES's Evacuation Order and Warning page, where it gives you a more in detail description of the difference between evacuation orders and warnings. The next one is the Ready.Gov Evacuations page, which has information on evacuations and planning. And then lastly is the CalOES Access and Functional Needs Library on evacuation and transportation resources, where you can find lots of good information and resources. This would be the time where you could ask questions if I was presenting this in person or live. However, since you're watching a recorded version of this, please send any questions you have to the TCRC ERC. My contact information can be found above. So today we covered the importance of maintaining situational awareness as it relates to disasters, what it means to shelter in place versus evacuate, evacuation warnings versus orders, considerations when sheltering in place or evacuating, and reasons for sheltering in place versus evacuating. Thank you so much for your time and your commitment to safety and disaster preparedness. As always, I welcome any and all feedback on this training. And here you will find some of the references to the material presented in this presentation. You can find the links on the TCRC website in the Rescue Tri-County section of the website or in the description of the video below.